everyone, welcome back to my channel. We are back in the pool, but this time it's going to be a much more fun, happy, lighthearted video. Well, we'll see. But I'm in the pool and I want to ramble. So that's what I'm going to do. It's going to be a nice little astro ramble talking about the 7 traditional planets and the principles of life that I think they represent. This is my personal interpretation. There are no rules, no one knows the truth of anything in the world, so I'm just making it up. But this is what I associate with each of the 7 planets. Here we go. So these are my 7 principles of life. The first principle is that it is. It is. And I feel like that is represented by the sun, because the sun brings us light. And when there is light, we can see things. Things become visible. And when things are visible, they become real. And so the sun tells us that it is. And it always is going to be. Because the sun always comes out. You know, even when it's a cloudy day, the sun is still there. So the sun represents permanence. It represents consistency. And it represents reality. And I really think that's interesting because real in Spanish means real, but it also means royal. And like, I think that's common among the Romance languages that come from Latin. And, you know, the sun is sometimes referred to, like in astrological texts, as the king, or it's sometimes the sun can represent kings, like in astrology. Like, they would say when there's an eclipse of the sun, it could be the killing of a king, because the sun, which is the king, gets eclipsed, gets darkened, gets killed. But I thought that's really interesting, like royal, real, king, the sun, reality. Okay, moving on to the moon. The next principle of life, which is less of a principle and more of a question, which I believe is represented by the moon, is it? Because the moon makes us question things. The moon kind of contradicts this idea of permanence and reality, because it reflects things, it distorts things, it changes things. I always say the moon represents change in life. You know, if the sun represents things staying the same, the moon is the opposite side of the coin, is that things are constantly changing. Like, yes, things are, but sometimes things aren't what they seem. And that's when the moon comes into question, because the moon comes out during the darkness. And we're going to get into the darkness with our next principle. But the moon sheds a light in the dark, but the moon doesn't light up the darkness, the nighttime, the same way that the sun does. The sun makes everything bright, whereas the moon only brightens a little bit. So there's still obscurity, there's still uncertainty. But we'll get to more about uncertainty when we talk about Mercury. But yeah, so the moon makes us question things. Is it really this way? Is this how I feel? Is this what is real? The moon sort of challenges the sun's reality. Is it really real? Or is that just how you feel? Okay, principle number 3. It isn't. It's not, unfortunately. And that is represented by my friend, Saturn. I love Saturn. I'm just super Saturn ruled. I have 4 personal planets in Saturn ruled signs, so I am Saturn, okay, and I can't help it. But Saturn tells us no. Saturn represents the darkness, and nothing exists in the dark. When the lights go out, you can't perceive things anymore. You can't tell where things are. You can't tell what things are. Saturn tells us that no, it does not exist. The darkness tells us that, you know, it is over. I also associate Saturn with death, with the ending of things. And like, I also think of like death Like when the sun, like the what's it called, the sunset, that's when darkness, that's when the sun dies, and that's when darkness thrives. So sometimes in life it isn't meant to be, it isn't going to happen, it isn't what you thought it was, and that's Saturn, you know. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't, and sometimes you don't know if it is. And that brings us to our next principle, is that it might be. And that of course is Mercury. I have written here uncertainty / certainty. I have like in brackets, because like Mercury will be certain about something, but then 5 minutes later it'll be certain about a completely opposite thing. And so it's both certainty and uncertainty. Like Mercury will say something as if it is the truth and then go on to contradict itself later. And that's just how life is, because it might be. It might be. Who knows, right? It's all up to interpretation, and Mercury knows that, and that's why Mercury is always changing, because it's seeing new perspectives. I haven't made that video yet, but it's coming. Gemini and perspective. But also, sorry I haven't made my Gemini video yet. I just have not been feeling it, Mr. Krabs. So it's coming. Sorry it's Cancer season and there's no Gemini video yet, but you live and you learn, okay? It might be coming. It might be. Yes, I also wrote possibility, because that is what I think Mercury represents to me, is that, you know, every single thing is possible. It's possible to see it that way. It's possible to interpret life in those ways. And so sometimes, you know, it is. Sometimes you're not sure. Sometimes it's not. But sometimes it just might be, you know? It might be. Okay. Moving on to principle number 5, which I associate with Jupiter. It doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it is, it doesn't matter if it's not, because at the end of the day, life goes on, right? I have written here, Jupiter, I associate the words appreciation, right? Because in the grand scheme of things, all these little things that Mercury is worried about, or like the moon, maybe the emotions that you're feeling, all those little things that you're feeling in the day-to-day, doesn't really matter in the end. Like, in the end, we all just want to enjoy and experience the joy. And how do we do that? Through perseverance, because it doesn't matter in the grand scheme, all these little things. And that's what Jupiter reminds us, is that there's a bigger picture going on here. And sometimes we get lost in the sauce, we get lost in the details, we get lost in the minutia. Okay, vocab word. The minutia of life. But Jupiter tells us we just got to keep going. We just got to keep going and expanding and living and appreciating and thriving. Because why? Because principle number 6, it's all for love. It's all for love. We came here to experience love, connection, beauty. We came here to feel, to connect with each other. And that, of course, is the planet Venus. One of my other favorite planets. My 2 ruling planets are Venus and Saturn, so they're my favorite planets. They're the best. They're the, you know, and there's no disputing that. I'm just kidding. But it's all for love. Cue the High as a Kite song. They're my favorite band from Norway, from Norwegia, if you will. And they have a song called All for Love, and it's really just all for love. At the end of the day, it's like a similar message to it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's all for love. We just gotta keep on living and keep on loving. But, you know, that does not mean that it isn't always tough, because it is, unfortunately, and that is principle number 7, Mars. It's always tough. There's always going to be hardship. There are always going to be difficult things, and that teaches us strength, conflict, and conflict resolution. But conflict, fighting, you know, struggle is necessary, and it is always going to be there. It's always tough. It's always tough. It's always rough. But that doesn't mean, you know, we can't enjoy all the things. And I think that's like the message of astrology to me, is that all of these things exist, and we have to be okay with all of these things existing. Because it is. Is it? It's not. Well, it might be. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of it, because it's all for love. And it's always tough, isn't it? Bye.